This morning we're going to be covering Proverbs and parables. They go together somewhat because parables are similar to wisdom literature, but it's just having a single lesson on Proverbs, single lesson on parables. They weren't quite long enough, and we needed to try to get this in a certain number of weeks anyway. So we put them together. So first we're going to deal. Proverbs, really, it's kind of wisdom literature. Wisdom literature is a little bit broader than Proverbs. There's Proverbs, which are the short little statements and such, but there's other forms that the wisdom literature comes in as well that we're going to talk about. So you'll see kind of the interchange of sometimes wisdom literature, sometimes specifically saying Proverbs. The wisdom literature refers to portions of Scripture where the format and structure of the passage is often bound to be in short, memorable statements that will often have no direct correspondence to the surrounding context. This is partly why studying Proverbs is so easy, and they are wonderful because of that. Books where wisdom literature is found is Job's, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Songs, and then I put the parables and the Gospels somewhat in there as well. Maybe you'll see why by the end. And then with wisdom literature, the meaning is typically found with ease. In other words, you don't. It's not hard, it's not hidden. You read it and you're like, yep, got it. And so they often function by stating something and then restating it with changes that indicate certain relationships and fill out the meaning. So the restatement might be contrasting, comparing, complementing, or unpacking the original statement. Sometimes restatement is within the same verse or in the immediate context, and sometimes restatement can be later in the same book. So a lot of times with the Proverbs, there's actually a number of Proverbs that speak to a particular issue. Like the proverb about a sluggard, like you'll find them scattered throughout. But the combination of all of them is important to get the full idea of the wisdom. So the things can be restated. Some Proverbs are restated word for word later in the book, which is intriguing as well. Interpretive issues when you're studying wisdom literature. Surrounding circumstances don't really matter. So this is the one genre where no matter how you're reading or when you're reading and what generation you're in or anything else like that, you're typically able to read it, get it. You don't need to know the background history. You don't need to really know the people that are being identified. All that stuff this is the one thing that's not necessary. Structure of the book. Likewise, the structure of the book may not have any significance at all. When you go through Proverbs, like the first 9 chapters are these statements of the father to his son kind of thing. Then it goes into just these other sayings. And there are some people that are trying to say there's might be some significance to that, and some would say there's like a significance to the structure of some of the other books, but really. It's not, maybe Ecclesiastes might have something to that effect, but it's not the same. In other ways, they're putting together this argument, and wisdom literature is just, here you go, here you go, here you go, and so you don't have to worry about it. This is why, when you see the New Testaments, they're bound with Psalms and Proverbs, because Psalms and Proverbs are very easy for a new believer to start with. So a lot of times when people are like, what book should a new believer start with? Actually, Proverbs would be a good one to start with because it gives them the sense that they can understand it, and it gives them a confidence that they're gaining wisdom from it. And there's a ton of wisdom in it, and the very things that have to be shaped in your mind so that you have the will to discipline yourself to go get more knowledge is what the Proverbs are teaching you. That the wise seeks knowledge and things like that. So usually Proverbs is a good one to recommend to a new believer. Often we recommend the book of John. That's actually a pretty complex book. It's written in simple language, but it's a very complex book, difficult to understand. It's the one gospel where Jesus says you have to eat my flesh and drink my blood. That's a little bit difficult for new believers and things. So sometimes it's not always the best one to do. So in Proverbs, typically what you have to look for when you're trying to unpack the proverb is what is the relationship of the different parts. So there's some typical structures. There's one where it's just a statement. A is true, therefore B is true, or A is true and B is true. The therefore is kind of implied. Sometimes there's the formula. There's a few of these towards the end of the book of Proverbs. 3 things are a mystery to me, 4 that I don't understand, and that typically is putting the emphasis on the 4th thing. And you're trying to see how it's related to the first 3. So an example of that one, is when the 3 things are a mystery, 4 I don't understand: the way of an eagle upon the air, the way of a serpent upon the sand, the way of a ship upon the sea, and the way of a man with a woman. So it's not really focusing on the eagle and the serpent and the ship. It's talking about how mystifying it is, a way with a man with a woman, because we actually experience that, and it's still a mystery to us. And then the therefore of these is understand and kind of believe what is said, that these things are true. And let me actually first address this. When we talk about wisdom versus knowledge, what is wisdom and how is it distinct from knowledge? This is what's going to help us understand some of the Proverbs.
Wisdom is knowing how to live out your knowledge.
Okay. Yes, what I would specifically say is wisdom is knowing what actions to take to get the results that you desire. So the world's wisdom is not God's wisdom. It still is wisdom because it still works. You do it according to the way they're saying, you get the thing that you are desiring, and so on and so forth. That's why here, what this wisdom tells you is it's saying this and this results in this. This and this will lead to this and this, therefore this. It's helping you to know the reality that will help you choose what you actually want, and that's why you can have some proverbs that are contrary to each other. The most famous ones are answer a fool according to his folly, lest he thinks he's wise. Very next one, do not answer a fool according to his folly, lest you become like him. How am I supposed to obey that? No, it's not. It's not it. It's telling you this will lead to this. This will lead to this. Choose wisely. And sometimes this outvalues this, and sometimes this outvalues this. And so, but both are true.
Just a question on that in general. If somebody were to ask you this, how would you maybe answer it? Proverb like, when a child's young, train them with the way they should go, and they will not depart from it. Mm-hmm. And so there's that sense of, says this, so if you do this, if you do A, B will happen. Like there's the truth to this. But then in Ecclesiastes, he even talks about the benefit of wisdom, but yet there's time and chance that happens to them all. And so do you put a hard fast, like A is true, B is true? Or do you say, generally if you do A, generally B will happen? That it's just kind of a good, wise thing, but it's not a definite where you can put my money down. My kids are okay because I've trained them up the way to go.
Yeah, and I think what that's actually trying to tell you is that the way that you train your kids up is the way they will go. None of us is able to train our kids up perfectly, but you'll find that our kids repeat us pretty well. And so and the other, and maybe this is humorous, but there's a very key observation in there. It says when they are old, they won't depart from it. And I've seen lots of people like grow up and then start having kids and they come back and they get right back into what they were originally doing. That doesn't always happen. But it is a general principle that the way you train them up is what they actually do. We just don't always do the most awesome job of that. So, and there's still the belief and not belief.
That's not a promise though, correct?
It's not a promise. It's not a promise. But what's to be understood with that is, even a non-believing child who may not turn and go with the way the Lord is, they still walk in the way you taught them. They're going to set the table the way you set the table. They're going to roll the toilet paper the way you roll the toilet paper. It's kind of, so there's a truth to it. It's just this isn't a way to guarantee your kids are going to get saved. So, because that's in God's hands. Contrasting, so you can have just straight up statement. You can have contrasting. A is bad, but B is good. A is good, but B is better. A is better than B, but we often seek B instead. So it's just, there's this idea of contrasting them, and you should be desiring the better of the two. There's comparing. A is like B and B is bad. A is like B and B is good. often when this is the kind, this type of comparing, if A is like B and B is bad, usually the first one is something we don't think of as being bad. And so this is making us understand that here's this thing I typically desire, but it's bad like this. Like, wait, what? And so it's helping me to see that. Or A requires thought, and thus so does B. Therefore, the way you feel about B is how you should feel about A. So in other words, there's times where we, in our heart, feel this way about something, but God feels this way. So he uses something that we feel the way he does about A to say this is like this, so you need to get your heart to shift over to so you see it like I do. Complementing. A is great, but even better when put with B. A is great, but does not go well with B. Therefore think about the interaction between A and B. And so we'll see some of those in the example as we go through it. So other type of wisdom literature, like instructional wisdom literature, that's the Proverbs 1 through 9, father instructing his son, the wise instructing the simple occasionally in certain Proverbs, teacher instructing the people of the nation, like you have in Ecclesiastes, or the experienced instructing the inexperienced, Song of Solomon. So a lot of there's a lot of wisdom literature that's let me instruct you and tell you these things. So what do we have, in studying this? First, there's a lot of use of personification. So you have wisdom and folly being personified by two women, as we'll see in our sample passage. The adulterous woman is personified both physically, both physical and spiritual adultery, but personifying that adulterous woman to get a point across as to how she's deceptive and so on and so forth. Often uses creation, so like the idea of observing the ant, look at the behemoth or the leviathan showing God's might, which you kind of see in Job. The stars of heaven showing the majesty of God's glory. So it's like look at these things and know and understand what's revealed in them. And then some of the use of creation, like in the Song of Songs, you're getting all this fruit and all this other stuff being brought out and used and such. That's one place where knowing some of the background history can help, because as one person said, that when you actually understand what's being said in the Song of Songs, it's enough to give an old rabbi a heart attack. And it is actually, I had a college group that talked me into doing Song of Songs. I only got to chapter 2. I'm like, I can't keep doing this with you guys. Because it was just getting too, they were giggling too much. And so we're like, no, can't keep it. So, but it actually is pretty graphic in some of those ways. But it's using these different things to convey desire and convey, the satisfaction and so on and so forth. So, right, so our first example passage here. This is just a series of the Proverbs from the book of Proverbs. So I want you guys to kind of tell me which one you think, what kind of proverb this is. Contrasting, comparing a statement. So a soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger.
I don't know what letters, but it's the opposite.
Yeah, so contrasting, yeah. So here you look like a soft answer turns away wrath. This is true. It's a true statement. But a harsh word stirs up anger. So it's like if you're in a situation and something's coming up and you want to come back with that quick word and that quick wit and everything else like that, it's telling you do that, you're going to stir things up. If you come back with a quiet answer and the nice answer, you're going to turn away the wrath and keep it out of that conversation. The tongue of the wise commends knowledge, but the mouth of fools pours out folly. This is one of those interesting things, because people are like, oh, knowledge puffeth up, and like, we don't need to go and get knowledge. Like, no, the heart of the wise, or the tongue of the wise, will commend getting knowledge and commend having that knowledge, not belittle it. The mouth of the fool Doesn't even look like getting knowledge at all. They just pour out folly all the time. Now with this one, it's what is this to help us with? How do we apply this one?
If you're gonna speak, it's better for you to have knowledge than speak and not have anything good to say.
Could be that way, but it also could be this helps us.
I'm always wrong.
No, you're not wrong. It's just, it could be that way. But also this is helping us to identify who is wise and who is foolish. So it's like you're listening and somebody is commending knowledge. It's like, hey, that's the tongue of a wise person. But I'm sitting there and it's just pouring out a whole bunch of stuff, and I'm like, that's the tongue of a foolish person, which is also true. I don't want to be that, and I do want to be wise. So both are actually legit. It's just we sometimes miss the other part of like, this is helping me to identify those things. The eyes of the Lord are in every place, keeping watch on the evil and the good. What's that?
Complimenting.
Complimentary. And what is the relationship of the second statement to the first statement?
He sees everything.
Okay. So the first one, the eyes of the Lord are in every place. And then does the next statement stay that broad? Does the next statement go broader? Does the next statement get narrower? Does it unpack more of what the first statement is? Does it narrow down what's being said?
It shows his involvement in the action in it.
Okay, yeah. So the idea is the eyes of the Lord are every place, which could go on a positive, negative, whatever. But then when he says keeping watch on the evil and the good, this is specifically coming down and saying he knows what you're doing, he knows the evil you're doing, and he's paying attention to that specifically, not just the awareness of all things. Then 4, a gentle tongue is a tree of life, but perverseness in it breaks the spirit.
You can be gentle and still be perverse or wrong.
Well, what this kind of saying is like, yes, a gentle tongue is a tree of life. Yes, a gentle tongue is good. But a gentle tongue with a perverseness in it is really bad. And so this is kind of that, this is good, but this with this is bad. And this is really interesting because a lot of things today, when you get into like either business or they talk about psychology or even counseling, and it's like, well, just say it this way, just say it this way. And so teaching is how to say things in a nice way. And I've dealt with people where you're talking with them and they're saying things in a very calm, nice voice, but they're out to get you. And you can tell they're out to get you. And that's kind of what this is. It's like when you have that gentle voice with the perverseness in it, especially if you're doing this with your kids, oh my gosh. I'm just going to talk gentle, and like, why are you yelling? It's like, because what you just said is actually, hurtful, but you're just using a gentle tongue to say it and thinking you're okay because you're being gentle with your voice, which is actually very common today. And so you'll get this a lot if you ever get like called in for to be let go at work. They're going to give this nice gentle, yeah, that kind of thing. So. The fool despises his father's instruction, but whoever heeds reproof is prudent. Contrasting. In the house of the righteous there is much treasure, but trouble befalls the income of the wicked. Contrasting again. And then the lips of the wise spread knowledge, not so the hearts of fools. And then that's contrasting again. The sacrifice of the wicked is an abomination to the Lord, but the prayer of the upright is acceptable to him. So that's contrasting, but catch what's saying. The sacrifice of the wicked. So the sacrifice is what they think the Lord wants. They're saying the sacrifice of the wicked is an abomination to the Lord. The simple prayer of the upright is acceptable to him. Which, real quick here, with this last one here, you have things like people that are living however they want, but then they're donating to this or donating that or going on some mission trip, but then they're still living, you know, how they want. It's like, it's important for us to realize that. And this is why, you know, I prefer, like, when somebody's, you know, coming in and you know that they're tithing for the wrong reasons. It's like don't tithe if you're going to do it for the wrong reasons. So what I mean by that, now I won't go back to that. You guys get what I said. If you can ask me later, if you're not. The way of the wicked is an abomination to the Lord, but he loves him who pursues righteousness. Contrasting again, there is severe discipline for him who forsakes the way. Whoever hates reproof will die. This is not contrasting. This is kind of complementary. So there is severe discipline for him who forsakes the way, and then whoever hates the reproof will die. What's the relationship between these two? Are they repeating the same thing?
It's expanding on, if you continue in that, then
right.
There's more to come.
Right. So the one who is the severe discipline can happen to one who loves reproof and can happen to one who hates reproof. But the one who hates it, you're going to die if you ignore it. You think of David and the reproof from Nathan, and he softened his heart, and so he was allowed to live. But there was still severe discipline for him with everything that happened in his family. But the one who hates reproof, like Saul, ended up dying. Sheol and Abaddon lie open before the Lord. How much more the hearts of the children of man? This is one place where you want to identify Sheol and Abaddon. But there's kind of, and know the background culture where in the ancient world you had the lands of the dead that were ruled by this set of gods, and the lands of the living that was ruled by this set of gods, and then often the sea that was ruled by another set, which is why you get Poseidon, Zeus, and Hades. But for this statement, is God is even the land of the dead. He's even over that, and even that lays exposed to him. So if even that realm is exposed to him, how much more our hearts right now? So it kind of really brings that out really powerfully. A scoffer does not like to be reproved. He will not go to the wise. And this one, what do we get out of this one? Like, how would you apply this?
Just as an example, if you are struggling with sin and living in sin, you will never go to someone that you know is going to correct you with that and lead you into a different direction.
Yeah, but there's also the other flip side of recognizing when when you're working with somebody and they're a scoffer and they they don't like to be reproved, they're not going to go to the wise and get that advice. Often they have to go through something rather drastic to ever get them to go to the wise. But when you have somebody like that, you know that they're probably not going to go to the wise to get advice. So just telling them, hey, you should, that probably isn't going to work. Now, that doesn't mean you don't tell them. It's not saying don't tell them. This is more of like, don't do this and expect it to work. When you talk to them, know that if they're a scoffer and they hate to be reproved, you can go and talk to them and say what you're going to say. They're not really going to necessarily go and seek that out. And so adjust your expectations accordingly.
Doing a quick question.
Yeah.
Just like a scoffer, and I'm thinking throughout the Proverbs, there's also like, you said sluggard, I think there's scorner. There's these words that seem to, they mean different things, but they seem to implicate the same type of person. Would you say you can kind of use them interchangeably? You have to really get at, well, what's a scoffer versus a sluggard versus a scorner?
A little bit. I mean, there's definitely overlap. Like if you drew like circles, there'd be a lot of overlap between those because all of them are fools. I think fool kind of brings a lot of that up. The scoffer is kind of like a particular part of fool, and the lazy one is kind of a particular part of fool. Because you can have a lazy person who's not a scoffer and vice versa.
Okay.
So, so fool is kind of the one place where they all overlap. The heart of him who has understanding seeks knowledge, but the mouth of fools feed on folly. Notice how this one is contrasting, but it sounds a lot like ones we've already heard. And that's what I'm saying, like it's not always right next to each other. they can be separated by a number of verses, even chapters. And so as you go through, you get this, if you take all of them and were to put them together and see them together, there's a slight little differences like this. The heart of him who has understanding seeks knowledge. So there's going to be all these people who seek knowledge, like the wise, the one who has understanding, the upright, and you're going to see that kind of shapes who is that person that seeks knowledge. And once you realize that, you begin to realize how valuable knowledge is to seek, kind of thing, if you want to be those things.
Is it specifically talking about God's word knowledge?
I don't think it's necessarily just that. I mean, it would definitely, I think, say true knowledge, like seek the truth, and have that knowledge and understanding, and that's a wise thing to do. It's kind of like, people today, they just hear something on the news or online, and they're like, oh, that's it. Like, okay, but did you look into it? Did you seek knowledge? Did you seek to understand what was actually happening, or are you just taking it in? And so that's why the one who, seeks knowledge, but this is the mouths of the fools feed on folly. So it's like, and that's like the person who just keeps talking about everything in the news and everything like that they've just heard, they haven't checked it, they haven't looked at it, they're not thinking through it, they're just repeating it on everybody. So the mouths of the food feed on that folly. It's like there's folly that's out there, and they just go after that instead. And so it's still, it brings that, it's not just pursuing God, pursuing the Bible, it's all of true knowledge and God's knowledge. All the days of the afflicted are evil, but the cheerful heart has a continual feast. This is about like the biggest duh. And evil here, by the way, this is something you have to be aware of with Hebrew. Evil kind of means like bad. Like when it says, God is the one who brings both good and evil in one passage. I think King James actually has, he is the maker of evil or something like that. It's basically God will bring calamity, and he'll bring bad things and he'll bring good things, is what the passage is saying. But because the King James translates it as evil, people use it as a passage to say, see, God created evil and God made evil, how could he be a good God, kind of thing. But it's just saying that the bad things that come in life that are evil to us. So when we're being afflicted, which we will be, when we're being afflicted, all those days to us are evil. They're bad days. And so it's acknowledging that. But the cheerful heart is a continual feast. And so it's contrasting what it's like to be in the bad days versus the good days. 16, better is a little with the fear of the Lord than great treasure with trouble with it. Better is a dinner of herbs where love is than a fattened ox and hatred with it. So you see how these two are very close to each other, and these are the comparison with the better than. This is better than this. And notice that what it's doing is it's saying better a dinner of herbs where love is than a fattened ox. So a dinner of fattened ox is way better than a dinner of herbs, but it's taking this contrast of, but where love is what's more important than having the fattened ox and be where hatred is. Now, this doesn't mean that there's only love when there's dinner of herbs, because when you're rich, there's no love. It's like, no, it's just, and that's where you got to be careful that you don't go too far with it. A hot-tempered man stirs up strife, but he who is slow to anger quiets contention. The way of a sluggard is like a hedge of thorns, but the path of the upright is a level highway. So basically, you see all these different things, and you'll notice how often they had nothing to do with the one before it. And so, and that's why it's just each one is taken as its own. Here, with this passage, I'm going to go through it relatively quickly because of time. So wisdom has built her house, she has hewn her 7 pillars. So I just want us to catch personification. Wisdom is this woman. She has slaughtered her beasts, she has mixed her wine, she has also set her table, she has sent out her young women to call from the highest places in the town. Whoever is simple, let him turn here. To him who lacks sense, she says, come, eat of my bread, and drink of the wine I have mixed. Leave your simple ways and live. Walk in the way of insight. So this first section here is the woman of wisdom, And she's laying out something that is very enticing, but it's good. It's good. There's nothing deceptive about it. Then you get to the section, whoever corrects a scoffer gets himself abused, who reproves a wicked man incurs injury. And it seems like you're going on a totally different subject. Do not reprove a scoffer, for he will hate you. Reprove a wise man, and he will love you. Give instruction to a wise man, and he will be still wiser. Teach a righteous man, and he will increase in learning. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is insight. So here you get this knowledge being directly, more at the whole of God. For by me your days will be multiplied and years will be added to your life. If you are wise for yourself. If you scoff, you alone will bear it. The woman of folly is loud. And then now you get the woman of folly. So you have the woman of wisdom, the woman of folly. And so occasionally you will see a structure like this. And what it's basically saying by putting the woman of wisdom here and the woman of folly here with this part in between, is that part in between is what's going to help you choose the right one of these two options. And then you go through the woman of folly. Also, she's seductive and knows nothing. She sits at the door of her house. She takes a seat at the highest place down, calling to those who pass by or going straight on their way. Whoever's simple, let him turn in here. So she's saying the same thing. And to him who lacks sense, she says, stolen water is sweet, and bread eaten in secret is pleasant. But he does not know that the dead are there, that her guests are in the depths of Sheol. So it's the deceptive side of that. So, parables. Parable literature consists of stories of varying length that make use of earthly and fleshly situations and values to communicate heavenly or spiritual situations and values. Often this genre is used to hide the meaning from certain parties or to communicate truths that would be highly offensive if stated directly. So a lot of times people look at Jesus' use of parables and they're like, see, when we teach, we should use stories because stories are so much more effective. And he used stories to hide meaning. And the scripture says that straightforward in Matthew 13. That they having eyes they may not see, having ears they may not hear, and that their hearts may not understand and turn. So it's like he's using parables to hide that stuff. The books or parables are found in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We're probably obvious on that, but they're also occasionally occurring in the Old Testament. There's interactions between the king of Israel, king of Judah, where the one tells a parable to the other, but it's the same thing. It's like he's telling a parable about this tree in Lebanon where this little bush comes up and asks to marry the daughter of this great tree in Lebanon. Well, the little bush is the king of Judah, and he's insulting him, significantly.
Same thing with Nathan going to David.
And Nathan going to David does a parable, and it's like David's like, "Arr!" And then all of a sudden, oh, that's me. So, and you can see how in both those situations, you're kind of hiding the meaning until you get to the end, and for whichever effect you want. So with parables surrounding circumstances, knowledge of the culture and contemporary to the author is often helpful, even needed to find the meaning. So for instance, when Jesus tells the parable of the king who went away to a foreign land to be made king and he comes back, that everyone there would have known he was talking about Herod. Because Herod went to Rome, received the kingship from the Roman Senate, and then came back and reinstated his kingdom. And so they would have immediately gone to that when he was talking about that. Both the earthly and the heavenly aspects are often wrapped up in the events contemporary to the author. So whether it's the farming stuff, whether it's things that are happening, you'll find those things within the parable. The structure of the book, where the parable falls within the ministry of Jesus, can often help us understand the parable and discern it from that structure. So like, for instance, the parables that are in Matthew 13 are all clearly pointing to the Jews and the Gentiles, and the Jews being hardened and the Gentiles being brought in, because that's what he's hitting on in Matthew 13. The parables that come out in Matthew 25 are clearly talking about the second coming and what's going to happen at that time, and giving a nature of it and such. And so there's like where they're falling in the book can help us see the purpose of the parable. And the theme of a group of parables will have a similar impact on our understanding as where it is in the structure of the book. Interpretive issues in parable literature, understanding the purpose and method of parable literature. The power of parables is in its ability to communicate indirectly and catch you, so that you you're agreeing with what he's saying. Also, you realize by agreeing with him, you're condemning yourself. And that's kind of the power of them. Parables seek to highlight worldly mind versus a spiritual mind. So where the parable offends, there's the worldly mind, and where the parable corrects, there is the spiritual mind. So in other words, the Pharisees listening to it, some of them got offended and then turned on Jesus. Others listened to it, heard it, and felt convicted. And so that this was this way of separating who were the ones being hardened and who were the ones not being hardened. With this, you want to look and see, there's this concept of those not having ears to hear versus those having with ears to hear. Jesus will say, if those who have ears to hear, let them hear. There's the one that has ears to hear. The one that not having ears to hear is the one who doesn't see the connection of the parable and the reality, or only partially perceives it. The one who disagrees with the connection and lives in denial, that's the one not having ears to hear. But the one who has ears to hear sees the connection between the parable and reality and agrees with that connection and then lives accordingly. So here's our sample passage for this. There's also one thing usually I have it in here, and I don't know if I accidentally, in copying and pasting things, accidentally left it out. But when you're dealing with parables, you have to figure out what is just kind of the window dressing of the parable. What are details that are given to make the story work, but they don't have a particular meaning. And I think we may have talked about this at an earlier time, because like Origen, when he interpreted the parable of the Good Samaritan, like even the 2 coins paid at the inn and all that stuff had some spiritual meaning for him. But there's actually details within the stories that you don't have to identify to get what the meaning of the parable is. So here another parable. There was a master of a house who planted a vineyard and put a fence around it and dug a winepress in it and built a tower and leased it to tenants and went into another country. When the season for fruit drew near, he sent his servants to the tenants to get his fruit. And the tenants took his servants and beat one, killed another, and stoned another. Again, he sent other servants, more than the first, and they did the same to them. Finally, he sent his son to them, saying, "They will respect my son." But when the tenants saw the son, they said to themselves, "This is the heir. Come, let us kill him and have his inheritance." And they took him and threw him out of the vineyard and killed him. And when, therefore, the owner of the vineyard comes, what will he do to those tenants? And they said, "He will put those wretches to a miserable death and let out the vineyard to other tenants who will give him the fruits in their season." Okay? So, as you look through this, who's the master? God. What is the vineyard? Kingdom. Yeah. You could say Israel, kingdom, those things that, and this is one of those key things that you begin to pick up because you get in the talk, before about Israel or are we Jews or any kind of thing, is that what was theirs through all of what Jesus teaches becomes ours. That's what this is going to say. And so with this, you have the kingdom, and when it says he let it out to tenants, who are the tenants then? Jews. And he went into another country. When the season for fruit, now this is the thing. If you get to that and you're like, he went into another country. Okay, well, what that means is that once God set up Israel, he went away and the went into another country is what is necessary for the story. It's a typical thing. A ruler would do that. It's just part of the story. It's not implying that God went away from Israel during that time. See what I mean? It's like you got to be careful with how you get into the details. When the season for fruit drew near, he sent his servants to the tenants to get his fruit. And the tenants took his servants and beat one, killed another, and stoned another. And again he sent other servants, more than the first, and they did the same to them. So who are the servants? Prophets. And finally he sent his son to them, saying, "They will respect my son," and that's Jesus. And so, and he then says that they say this about the heir. "Is the heir, come, let us kill him and have his inheritance," which shows that they are trying to keep Jesus from having the kingdom. They want to keep their power, so they're going to kill him and keep what they have, which is exactly what they do. And so they threw him out of the vineyard and killed him. When therefore the owner of the vineyard comes, what will he do to those tenants? Now you can get really specific, like, oh, they threw him out of Jerusalem, so the vineyard is Jerusalem. It's like, the overall thing here is the kingdom of God, and you can tell from the context that it's in there in Matthew. And then when he says, when they said to him, he will, and then they just condemn themselves. He will put those wretches to a miserable death and let out the vineyard to other tenants who will give him the fruits in their seasons. So they're not even picking up that this is them he's talking about. This is, Jesus said to them, have you never read in the scriptures, the stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. This was the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in your eyes. Therefore I tell you, the kingdom of God, and this is where we have the answer to the earlier question, the kingdom of God will be taken away from you and given to a people producing its fruits. And the one who falls on the stone will be broken to pieces, and when it falls on anyone, it will crush him. Now that statement is actually a very hard one to unpack, and due to the time, we're not going to focus on that. What I want us to catch, though, is that he makes this statement then, using their response to say what is going to happen to the kingdom, saying it's going to be given to another people producing its fruits. And then it says, when the chief priests and the Pharisees heard this parable, his parables, they perceived that he was speaking about them. Notice they don't perceive exactly the meaning or come away with it. They just perceive he's speaking about them. And although they were seeking to arrest him, they feared the crowds because they held him to be a prophet. So that ability for them to perceive he's speaking about them, which, of course, because he said, therefore I tell you, the king will be taken away from you. And so you have that. But you see with the parable, you have to be careful that you don't get too much into the weeds of the details and try to say a whole bunch of things. And usually there's this overarching thing of like, hey, God set up Israel, it didn't bear its fruit, and he kept sending the servants to get that fruit, and they continue to not have that. So then he sends his son, and they kill him, and that is why the Jews are being hardened and the Gentiles are being brought in, because of the punishment for that very thing. And they themselves pronounce the judgment on themselves, because that is what would be fair in that situation. So it takes the earthly situation that's reflecting a heavenly reality of what was going on with God and Israel, and they get a certain emotional reaction to that earthly situation. So now you can understand God's actions against Israel, and it makes sense.
So the other tenants are Gentiles in this?
Yes, the other when it says the other people producing its fruits, that would be the Gentiles coming in. So any questions you guys have? We actually got through that quicker than I thought we would. About parables or proverbs.
Not maybe directly about like the parables, proverbs. I was just thinking through this. Maybe you personally, have you ever found this beneficial when engaging somebody, trying to witness them? Not necessarily that you're trying to teach them a parable, but get them to kind of say their own words, and that way if they may agree now with their own words, they disagree with their own words. Either way, they can't argue with you because you kind of got them to a place where they've agreed with you on something that is key. Yeah. Is that helpful? Not helpful? Have you ever used that technique? In a sense,
yeah, I mean, you guys have probably heard me use it in that, if I'm sitting down with somebody and they're questioning, why would God send somebody to hell? And I sit down and I kind of say, if someone came along and grabbed your mother and beat her and murdered her and cut her into pieces, and you were the first one to come along and find that person, what would you want to do? Because they don't understand the anger God has towards sin, and they'd say, well, and a lot of times they're finally like, well, we're supposed to. No, I'm not asking what you're supposed to do. I'm saying, what would you want to do? I don't want to kill him. Exactly. And I said, and that's not wrong. That's called justice. That's a good thing. And it takes murder for us to get that angry and that level of justice. God, because he's holy, it doesn't. So it's like I'm using something that's a story or an earthly situation that makes them feel a certain way that helps them to understand what God is doing. And there's times, when I'm in counseling and I'm talking with a husband and, I don't understand. Okay, well, let me what if this and this and this and this were the case? And like, well, yeah, that's wrong. Okay, well, that's what you're doing to your wife. You know, so yeah, you do. I mean, it's still a very powerful way to you know, to teach. It is, again, it's, you know, whether they understand it or not is not in our hands. So, does that answer the question you're asking?
Yeah.
I think the when it comes to, like I said, with the Proverbs, it is. I feel when people are like, you know what, I'm a brand new Christian, I haven't really read the Bible, what should I do? Well, there's wonderfully 31 chapters to Proverbs. Take one chapter a day for a month and read through it, and then we'll sit down and we'll talk about it. It just gives them that sense that they can understand Scripture. But then you follow that up and come up behind them and say, did you see how it talked about pursuing knowledge, and the wise pursue knowledge? Like, you're going to have to pursue that knowledge to continue to understand Scripture as you dive further in. But it's wise for you to do that because of the fruit that you gain from it. And that's typically what I would advise for.
Have you talked through Proverbs before? And if so, did you go chapter by chapter, or did you tend to organize by, and we're going to talk about this idea and pull the different, since it is so like line item? And
I have not taught through Proverbs,
okay.
And I don't think I ever will.
Okay.
I've taught through the first 9 chapters, but I didn't go beyond that. What instead is you get familiar with the Proverbs yourself as a teacher, and they are great as reinforcing statements while you're teaching things elsewhere. So using them within that aspect, and being able to reference them while you're in conversations, you know. So I like hearing when you're sitting in a board meeting or a ministry team meeting, we should do this because, and then here's the proverb that says why it was wise to do that. I think that's the biggest purpose for the Proverbs is, and to teach them is very difficult because of the you can kind of go and put them all together that it all have to do with this thing or that thing, but even then they're so repetitive. It's very hard. It's very hard to do that, and so they're more of a very practical. Read them yourself, use them here and there, but a direct teaching through is not what I recommend. So Psalms is similar, you know, to just teach straight through the Psalms is very, you know, difficult. It's not impossible. One's going to be a very long series, but aside from that, those Psalms, it's just kind of like this. It's kind of like there are books in my office that I read all the way through, and there are books in my office that are reference works. And I go to the reference works when I need them. I don't just read them straight through. And Psalms and Proverbs are like that. You go to them, you go to the proverb, you go to the psalm that's helping you in the circumstance that you're in, but it's not like you just read through them. Once you're familiar with it, you can go back to them. So. Anything else? All right. We will see you guys next week.
Thank you.